Welcome to the afternoon session. We're talking about connected buildings, hospitals, and factories. I'm Monica Paolini of Senza Fili Consulting, and I'll be chairing the afternoon. We have a lot of very interesting talks about different applications. And I would like to start with a few comments before we get into the presentations. Oh, and by the way, in terms of housekeeping, we're running a little bit late, so we will be a little bit later. So we'll try to keep the break a little bit shorter so that we can still be on time and make it to our final, the first reception and then the party. So what I wanted to talk a little bit about is to sort of take a little bit of a step back. So the presentations today will be about specific applications. And in IoT, it's something really fascinating. You learn all those things that we couldn't do before, and all of a sudden now we are allowed to do. So it's all very exciting. And that's great to see. But my perspective is more coming from the network point of view. And if you look at what IoT represents in terms of, hey, I got light. Excellent. There we go. Oh, that's even better. So we can stay awake. Okay. So if you look at it from the network point of view, there are a lot of things that are going to change with IoT. And so it's very easy to sort of get lost into all the applications because they're so exciting. It's like it's a new way of doing things. But what does it mean in terms of the networks? And I think that it's going to be even more interesting, especially if you're a network person. So the first one, obviously, is the size of the market expanding, the revenue opportunity, and that's pretty obvious for operators, mobile operators, for the enterprise. This is a huge opportunity in growth. It's very difficult in an industry that you have all of a sudden such a big part of a market that is ready to be developed, and you know it will happen. So that in itself is quite new. But how it's going to happen is not just in addition to what we have. It's not just having more devices and more users on the network, on the networks. It's having different networks, different type of devices, much more variability in terms of what the network is going to do. So this is going to change, has a profound cultural change in the way we think and operate networks. So it's not just adding services. It's not, having better security or lower latency. It's way more than that. So the first thing is that I would like to say is that IoT is what will make 5G shine. So we all know about 5G and all the promises that it brings. But if there were no IoT, 5G would still be cool, but it would not be as interesting because a lot of IoT applications will actually need a lot of that, the capabilities of 5G, more so than us as the usual subscribers, because some of them are really mission critical, some require a lot of bandwidth, some do not. And it's exactly this mix of different type of traffic. The traffic is going to be much less homogeneous. And that will actually put create a lot of opportunities and pressure on whoever operates the network. Because if all the traffic is the same, if all the bits are equal, the only thing you can do is to push them through and hope for the best. If you have a lot of variability in terms of requirements, then you have to be smart on how you use the variability in the requirements to use your network resources in the best way. So you're actually much more challenged in terms of this is what you can do with the network. So it's much more interesting and fun. A lot of things that we have learned about, the analytics, using big data. We had some presentations of this today. Become much more real. And so this is, I think it's a way to actually get all the functionality of 5G to come around. Now, another one is the use of multiple networks. In order to have IoT, you cannot rely on what we currently have today, which is basically a very simple set of networks. We have cellular, 3G, 2G, and 2, 3, and 4G, and Wi-Fi. With Wi-Fi accounting for most of the wireless traffic, even though we often think the other way around, but it's basically Wi-Fi and cellular, and that's it. And to a large extent, they don't talk to each other. You use them from the same devices, but they're two separate networks. With IoT and 5G again, and even before 5G, we're going to see many more networks, and those networks working more tightly with each other. I would say that that's possibly the best or the most interesting, from a technological point of view, contribution of 5G is not so much that you have more capacity, but you have multiple networks working together, so that the capacity that is right there and it's available can be used in a more efficient way. So with IoT, because of the different requirements, you're going to see many more types of network coexisting in the same place, and they will have to be integrated at some level. Not all of them need to be integrated in the same way. The level of integration is going to be different, and that's exactly what's interesting in what is the best way to go. We don't know all the answers, but I think there is a lot of interesting stuff going on there. And that brings also the issue of who owns those networks. With IoT, clearly there is much more of a direct interest from the enterprise venue owners, and those entities know what they're doing, know what they're trying to do, know what services they have to provide, know what the value of the network is to them. So what we're seeing is much more a direct involvement of the enterprise venue owners, whoever controls the physical location, to deploy the network, to pay for it, to manage it. So the relationship between operators and those that are actually using the IoT services, again, the enterprise venue owners or cities, is going to change, with the end users taking more of a direct role in managing those services. And I think that this is a very good transition or evolution, because a lot of the networks, well, traditionally cellular networks were assessing how good of a coverage you have, the nationwide coverage. That was good, and it's still good, and there's a lot of value. But there is also now, I think, a lot of value in the other direction, to make those networks local, private. And the two will coexist, but it's interesting. It will be interesting to see how that relationship develops. Now, another thing is what that also brings is so multiple networks, private, public. Another interesting dimension is how to use the spectrum. So today we have licensed versus unlicensed. With things like 3.5 and CBRS in the US, we're seeing different regulatory models so that you share the spectrum that is available. So basically there are some entities that have access to the spectrum. They have other, for whatever, like in 3.5, it's the military and some wireless service providers. If they don't use it, or wherever they don't use it, somebody else will use that spectrum. Now, for IoT, that's a very valuable thing, because you have access to very good spectrum in specific areas. So when you have a private network, a network that it's that only has to, it's a small thing. If it's in an area where nobody else is using the spectrum, and there is, for instance, no military with 3.5, there is spectrum that is available basically for free for the enterprise or whoever needs to use it. So that's a very good opportunity to use the spectrum that otherwise sits unused, and to promote this kind of applications, because if you have an application where you require a lot of bandwidth, to get licensed spectrum becomes very, very expensive. So there are IoT applications that require a lot of spectrum, and we talk about hospitals today, hospitals and factories. Those are situations where it's not the IoT, it's not a sensor type of applications. Oftentimes you need to have a lot of bandwidth, specific latency, reliability, and you can have it because you can use a specific band, so you don't have to deal with interference like as you would do with Wi-Fi. So Wi-Fi is very useful for some applications, but not others. And so, and this, from a regulatory point of view, it's a very innovative way to address the limitation in spectrum usage, but also gives us the ability to use whichever network, whichever technology is suitable for an application. This afternoon, again, we will focus more on the specific applications that we have out there, but I think it's important to think about what is that it's changing. So all those changes translate at the end of the day in a very different cultural environment. If you want, well, maybe culture is not really, it's operational, and it's not just technology. It's business models, culture, who does what within the service provider, enterprise, relationship between entities, ecosystem. All of this is really changing to be able to accommodate IoT applications. So who is going to be responsible, for instance, for creating the services? Who will manage them? Who owns the infrastructure? So if you are an enterprise and you need your own application, say let's say in a factory, it makes sense for the factory, for the enterprise who owns the factory, to deploy their own network, to pay for it. So a lot of the issues of the business model, who pays for it, it will be simply the enterprise because they benefit from it. Now, it is important, it's not just who pays for it, but the enterprise know exactly what the value it is to them. So it actually, I think, is going to accelerate things, because if you have an operator, system integrator, an operator coming in and trying to offer those services, the operator needs to understand what's the value to the company, price it, and I've done this many times. You deal with this, and it's just a very difficult conversation, because nobody really knows what's the value and what are the values and what are the costs. So I think that having the enterprise, the end users, pay some of it, not necessarily always, but in some cases they will. It will make the system much smoother and leaner and easier to develop. So with this, I would like to close. I don't want to take too much time. So we're going to go through the presentation. I would like to have the speakers leave a little bit of time for questions, and so that we can get to the end on time.